was tomorrow.
This evening.
No, you're a day early.
You're a day out.
You definitely said Thursday.
Wednesday.
I have it down in my diary as Wednesday. Now, how did I make that mistake? I know, you originally said Thursday.
Yes, I knew it would be my fault.
You're not angry?
No, I can't afford to be.
Why not?
I'm staying for a night or two.
Good. Hungry?
Ravenous. I've spent the entire day trying to persuade a welfare officer to do a little welfare work for a change.
Well, I'll just have a wash and then... No, I won't.
It's unlike you to go dirty.
You haven't seen the washing facilities here. The basin's cracked and there's... Ooh. No, I'll wait until we get to the restaurant.
Who bought the flowers?
I did. You don't imagine anybody else would have thought of it?
What did Gallagher have to say?
Who are we burying today?
Such a wit. Well, how are things going?
Paperwork's coming along.
The briefs?
Still slow, but improving. I've an interesting one coming up. Libel should last a few days.
London?
Northern Circuit.
Oh, yeah.
I like your tie.
Ah, yes. You do have good taste.
John doesn't think so.
John can go and jump in the lake. There's nothing wrong with your taste, Harriet. You mustn't let him dictate to you. You stand your ground and tell him to go to hell.
I like the man.
All he wants is a feminine shadow of himself.
He's entitled to his opinion.
Not if it's to get a cheap laugh at your expense.
You know, you're becoming paranoid about him.
Is that your diagnosis?
Yes, it is. But you needn't worry. He feels the same about you.
Does he?
He sees me as one of his vested interests.
And what do you think?
I think you're a pair of asses.
What did he get?
The maximum.
Will there be an appeal?
No, I expect so.
Was his lordship on form?
He couldn't have been more considerate. He even berated me for my harshness towards the accused. I'm sure the poor fellow thought he was going to be bound over. Nearly fell out of the dock when his lordship pronounced sentence.
He's very naughty, you know.
Have you got everyone working?
All except for Miss Peterson. I did say at the time it would be difficult.
You did. Still, she has this libel case coming up.
Oh, that reminds me. Bardolph and Rock have been making tentative inquiries about your movements.
Those two Scrooges. They owe us money, don't they?
Apparently the check's in the post.
Yeah, they must want my services rather badly.
It's the same libel action as Miss Peterson's.
They want me to act for the plaintiff?
Very much so.
Does it warrant a suit?
Not on the surface, no.
Murky waters. Must remember to pack my deodorant spray.
You're interested?
Oh, well, I think I might be. You see, I know how Bardolph's mind works. His client's a little worried, a little unsure. That's why he wants the best. So, who better than the person Miss Peterson goes in fear and trembling of?
You?
Of course.
And he doesn't know Miss Peterson, does he?
Careful, Belle. One can still be hanged for high treason.
Yes, we're against each other again. Isn't it marvelous?
For you two or for the litigants?
I didn't take them to court.
You know, you're beginning to sound as callous as Sir John Almighty himself.
Why don't you give your social conscience a night off?
No, you've completely missed the point.
So, enlighten me.
Present me with the opportunity of putting the boot in, and I shall take it. And you know why? Because I'm bloody jealous of the man, that's why. The trouble is, if I don't control my natural instinct to thump him, I'll find you yawning your way out of my life.
Yes, you will.
Blame it on my reactionary parents. They had this silly notion that if a man and a woman are genuinely fond of each other and are free, they should marry. What about it, Harriet? Go on. At least it would stop me being jealous.
You'd give up your country practice for me?
I never said that.
But you could.
No, I couldn't, Harriet. It's my work. It's my bread and butter.
I'd be prepared to keep you.
And what about my self-respect?
What about mine, if I were to give up my work, my bread and butter?
But it's expected of you.
By whom?
By those nasty, horrible villains called men.
Exactly. Rules made by themselves, for themselves. Well, I don't happen to agree with them.
I'd never have known.
You know, you chose the wrong moment to propose.
I always do.
Now, if it had been last weekend, I might have succumbed. Everything went wrong on Friday. It was one of those days. I was slapped down by Gallagher, by another barrister, and by Bill. There were no briefs, no pleadings, nobody wanted me. And when I left, it was pouring with rain. I couldn't get a taxi and arrived home soaked to the skin.
Well, why didn't you give me a ring?
I did. Friday evening, twice on Saturday, you weren't in. So I took myself off to the theatre. I hate going to the theatre on my own.
Wasn't Gallagher available?
Well, in the mood I was in, it only have irritated me. Well, I thought that would please you.
So, where is our friend?
Well, if you're referring to junior counsel, I'm afraid he's been detained in court. He sent us profuse apologies and asked me to carry on. Of course, if you'd rather wait hours...
No, I'm not complaining. In fact, I wondered when I would meet the big white chief himself.
Well, you now have the pleasure.
Personally, I think it's one big con trick. I start off with the solicitor, who then brings in our friend, who then brings in you. When does the Attorney General arrive? Or does he just get commission?
Well, the costs would have been even more if we decided on a jury trial.
Yes, now that's something that's been worrying me. Were we right to dispense with a jury?
You're the one who was complaining about the costs.
Oh, to hell with the costs. Provided I don't have to pay for them.
Well, you won't, if the verdict goes in your favor.
Yes, that's why I'm worrying whether we should leave it to some old fool of a judge. You see, she's such a liar.
But the man's such a liar. I just hope the judge will see through him. Do you think you were right not to insist on the services of a jury?
Jury trials always take longer, therefore they cost more. And a judge is less likely to award extensive damages.
I see. By the way, has Mr. Fielding taken the £505 we paid into court?
Well, of course not. He thinks he'll get more.
So, what was the point?
Say he wins the case. If he doesn't get more than £505 in damages, he has to pay your costs, and they could be quite considerable. It also shows that you're willing to settle.
But I don't want to settle.
You won't have to. It's too late for him to take the money now. But at least you tried. That could be very important. Now, as you know, we're pleading qualified privilege.
I'll never understand that, I'm afraid.
It means the other side will try to prove that the letter you wrote was actuated by malice. That's why I'm a little concerned about your relationship with the plaintiff. It was definitely he who broke off the engagement.
Yes,
Why?
because he'd got what he wanted.
The house.
Yes, I was therefore of no further use to him.
You realize the other side will try to prove that you were so angry, so embittered at being jilted, you wrote an untruthful letter in order to get your revenge.
Oh, but that's nonsense. He broke off the engagement 14 months before I wrote that letter.
His counsel will say it gave the wound time to fester. He'll probably trot out the old cliché about hell having no fury.
Are you saying she broke off the engagement?
Yes.
Why?
She didn't think that we'd be compatible.
Pity.
Pity?
Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
No, you're wrong. Definitely wrong. Far better the other way. That she should have broken off the engagement. It doesn't make me out to be such a heel.
And, are you?
No. But they'll try to make me out to be one. Now, what you have to concentrate on is my community work. I'll give you some more examples of that. Don't you want to take notes?
Tell me, am I advising you, or are you advising me?
A great deal is going to depend on this conversation which took place on the evening of March the 27th, 1969.
But Councillor Forbes was there, and he's going to be a witness for me.
Councillor Martin was also there. He's going to swear the salient part of the conversation never took place.
It's only because he and the plaintiff are great buddies.
And there's Colonel Watson. He's also against you.
Oh, he's never liked me. Ever since I opposed his election to leadership of the council, I shan't lose any sleep over his testimony.
Miss Stevens, I think I should warn you. Sir John will show you very little mercy.
Oh, don't worry. I'm quite a tough nut. Just as I'm sure you are. How else could we compete with them?
And beat them.
Nothing would give me greater pleasure than to beat Tom Fielding.
And you're positive we'll win?
Naturally.
And you will be there all the time? I mean, you won't slip off to another court and leave it to your junior, because I'm paying for your services, Sir John, and not for your twopenny-halfpenny apprentice. Understand?
How could I fail to understand such charming eloquence?
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I'll say this for the defense counsel. She's prettier than you.
Ah. What have you done with my junior?
Left him in the dining car, chatting up a rather attractive girl.
I shall do the same. But with a very attractive woman.
Why did you join us? Weren't you hungry?
I don't see why I should help British Rail dispose of that surplus rolling stock. Besides, it's an offence to the delicacy of my palate, not to mention the stability of my digestion.
You mean the soup would have finished up in your lap?
Never in my lap, always in my companion's. And I didn't want to ruin your dress.
Like it?
Very much. Your taste's improving.
Ian chose it for me.
Yes, well, perhaps it is a shade provincial, but quite appealing. Is he still trying to turn nasty prisons into pretty holiday camps?
I think he enjoys coming to London.
Because of man's inhumanity to man, or because of you?
Both, I imagine.
You know, it's criminal to keep anyone chained up, even a slave. You really ought to put him out of his misery.
How?
Either marry him or shoot him.
Do you know the difference between you two? He expresses his feelings, you conceal yours.
I'm a thinking man, Harriet. And as Chesterfield said, life is a tragedy to those who feel and a comedy to those who think.
Horace Walpole, actually. Who said it?
You know, something's happening to our relationship, and I don't think I like.
What's that?
You're starting to have the last word.
Shades of Pygmalion and Galatea.
No, Frankenstein and his monster. You realize these next few days are going to be utterly boring.
You could have taken the money out of court.
All for £500? Cost you 2,000 at the very least.
If we lose.
What's your impression of the defendant?
Truthful.
Wish I felt the same about the plaintiff. And that is why this honest man became a councillor, to serve the community to the best of his considerable ability. Of course, I realize the word service is a dirty word to the cynics of this world, but thank God not everyone is a cynic. And 15 months after the death of his wife, he became friendly with the defendant, Mrs. Stevens.
Miss Stevens.
Oh, I do apologize. In 1970, he became friendly with Miss Stevens, a 40-year-old spinster. Now, she too was a councillor and belonged to the same political party as Mr. Fielding. The friendship blossomed. They were engaged to be married. 2 months later, Miss Stevens broke off the engagement. And we now come to the events leading up to this most insidious libel.
About time.
Now, while they were still engaged, Mr. Fielding bought from Miss Stevens' great-aunt the freehold of the Larches, a detached residence of 8 bedrooms that included 2 acres of ground. Now, his intention was to give the house to the defendant as a marriage gift. And the great-aunt died of natural causes 3 weeks after selling the house. Now, 1 year later, the plaintiff learned for the first time that a council subcommittee of which he was not a member was considering the possibility of buying the Larches and turning it into a sports complex. Mr. Fielding immediately informed the subcommittee chairman that he owned the freehold and was therefore an interested party. Now, the full council, however, decided that the property was ideal for a sports complex, and the transfer of the freehold took place. Now, I shall prove beyond doubt that my client couldn't possibly have known when he purchased the property in question that the council intended to use the grounds as a sports complex. I should now like to call my first witness. Colonel Watson, would you kindly read it aloud?
Certainly. The letter's addressed to Colonel Watson, leader of the council. It reads, Dear Colonel Watson, I think you ought to know that Mr. Fielding used his position as a councillor to buy the Larches, knowing that the council intended to purchase it for use as a sports complex. My great-aunt sold it to him for £30,000. He has now sold it to the council for £128,000. By his actions, this cunning and ruthless man has brought discredit to the council and to the party. He must be made to resign forthwith. It's signed, yours sincerely, Sarah Stevens.
And your reaction when you'd finished reading it?
I was deeply shocked
Why?
that Mr. Fielding should use his position in order to feather his nest.
You believe the contents of the letter?
Implicitly, I had great faith in Miss Stevens' judgment. I felt certain she must have undeniable proof, otherwise she'd never have written it.
And what did you do?
I discussed the letter with the chairman of the local party constituency. He was absolutely horrified.
This won't do, you know.
Are you objecting, Miss Peterson?
Is the chairman to be a witness?
No?
Hearsay, my lord.
Quite so. Kindly confine yourself, Colonel, to your own feelings.
Yes, of course. So I decided to confront Mr. Fielding with a letter, expecting him to offer his resignation.
And did he?
No, sir. I've never seen a man so angry. He said it was a tissue of lies, and he demanded that he be given the letter so that he could bring a libel action against Miss Stevens.
And what happened then?
At a private meeting with Miss Stevens, I told her of Mr. Fielding's attitude.
And?
Well, she was delighted. She laughed. She said, "Good. Now I can pay him back."
Those were her precise words.
Oh, yes. Well, more or less.
I don't wish to be pedantic, Colonel, but more or less isn't good enough. We must know the exact words.
She said, "Good. Now I can pay the bastard back."
Most feminine. Good. Now I can pay the bastard back. Did you understand what she meant by that?
Well, I assume she wanted revenge for something.
Since when have assumptions been permitted as evidence?
What else did the defendant say?
She said everything in the letter was true, and he mustn't get away with it. I therefore decided to make my own inquiries.
And how long did they take you?
About a fortnight.
And your conclusions?
That the letter was malicious and untrue. I found nothing that would substantiate Miss Stevens' idea of truth.
Thank you, Colonel.
I should like to remind you that you're under oath.
I don't have to be reminded, madam. I'm fully conversant with the procedure. Providing you allow me to speak my mind, there ought to be no problem
You're
at all
in court,
regarding...
Colonel, not in the council chamber. I shall ask the questions, you will answer them. There'll be no oratory, thank you. You said you have great faith in Miss Stevens' judgment.
I said I had.
Does that mean you no longer trust your own judgment?
Well, there's nothing wrong with my judgment.
But you were wrong about Miss Stevens, were you not? And apparently you were wrong about Mr. Fielding. You thought he'd feathered his nest.
Everyone's allowed to change his mind.
But you keep changing yours. It's most confusing. Tell me, do you think Miss Stevens was right to put down her accusations on paper?
No, I don't. There were other ways of going about it.
Such as?
Miss Stevens and I could have discussed it quietly between ourselves, over a glass of sherry.
And then?
Then I would have told Mr. Fielding.
Over another glass of sherry?
No, glass of port.
Surely the outcome would have been the same.
Let me assure you, it wouldn't have come to all this.
You'd have swept it under the carpet, I see.
I did not say that.
Well, that's what you mean.
Not at all.
The last thing you wanted was for this to be made public.
I really must protest.
There
This
must
line of-
time, my lord. Colonel Watson must be allowed to say what he means.
I agree. You must allow the witness time to explain himself, Miss Peterson.
I apologize, my lord. Explain yourself, Colonel.
I should have done precisely what I did.
And what precisely was that?
I perused the minutes of the subcommittee when the possible acquisition of the larches was first mentioned. I found that this meeting took place in 1971, a year after Mr. Fielding had purchased the property.
And that was all the proof you needed?
No, madam. Miss Stevens told me that on March 27, 1969, during a committee break, the matter was discussed by her and Councillors Fielding, Martin and Forbes.
And you asked Councillor Forbes if such a discussion took place?
And Councillor Martin.
What was Mr. Forbes's reply?
He didn't remember.
But then he telephoned you.
Yes, 2 days later.
Why?
To tell me he could remember.
But you didn't believe him.
He's a member of the opposition. At that time, a local election was imminent. I came to the conclusion he was playing politics.
In your judgment?
Yes, in my judgment.
Yes, well, we've already found out what your judgment is like.
There's nothing wrong with my judgment. How dare you insinuate otherwise?
No further questions.
Now, one point of clarification, Colonel. Now, if you'd found during your inquiries that Miss Stevens' accusations were valid, what would you have done?
I should have asked for Mr. Fielding's resignation and demanded a personal apology from him.
And would this have been an apology in private?
No, sir, in public, in front of the entire council and in the presence of the press.
Thank you, Colonel. You may step down.
Who else was present, Mr. Martin?
Mr. Fielding, Mr. Forbes, and Miss Stevens.
Was the sports complex discussed at all?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, it was I who brought up the subject. I said I thought it was about time we had one.
Did anyone comment?
Councillor Forbes was most enthusiastic about the idea.
Did you mention where you thought it should be built?
No.
Did anyone?
No.
Would you say you and Mr. Fielding are good friends?
Oh, yes. We often play golf together.
You never again discussed the sports complex with him?
No?
Not even later, when you were deputy chairman of the subcommittee that dealt with the matter?
We never discussed it.
He never told you he'd acquired the freehold of the Larches?
No.
It came as a complete surprise to you?
Yes.
You did say you and Mr. Fielding are good friends.
Yes.
No further questions.
Neither have I, my lord.
Yes. Well, I think we've reached the stage when we can adjourn until Monday morning, yes?
Want to settle?
Yes, I'll settle. For a hot bath.
I doubt whether Colonel Watson's been spoken to like that since he was in nappies.
You shouldn't have been so pompous. Still, I think you might have won that round.
Ah, but you handled Martin beautifully. Even so, I'm looking forward to Monday and winning the case.
You'll win it only if the judge is prejudiced.
The old boy's never left the upper fifth, Harriet. I'm sure he considers Miss Stevens a little sneak.
Is that how you're going to play it?
I shall play it to win.
It's what I keep saying. It's just a game to you people.
Kind of termed it a sport.
And to hell with feeling.
Well, does the surgeon feel anything as he chops off the patient's leg?
At least he doesn't try to humiliate him.
There's absolutely no similarity between the two professions.
Which brings that conversation to an end. Well, I must away. Thank you for the supermarket delicacies and the bottle of plum. You really ought to have more confidence in your cooking ability, Harriet.
My range may be limited, but I have every confidence.
And why is it necessary always to have a doctor in attendance?
Very droll.
I've enjoyed myself. Good night, Moody.
Good night, Gallagher.
I should like to have heard more about this penal reform committee of yours.
Then you shouldn't have changed the subject.
Yes. Well, now, the train tomorrow leaves at 15:30 hours,
Oh,
Harriet.
why can't you say one something?
You won't be late, will you?
I promise I will. Bye.
That man is a bloody bull.
He only does it to annoy you.
I thought the idea was for us to have a nice, quiet evening on our own.
He invited himself.
That follows.
He's quite lonely, you know.
Is it surprising? This is nicer.
Yes, isn't it? Still looking for a boat?
Mm-hmm. I've narrowed it down to these three. Here, the choice is yours.
That's just a sop. Anything to get me to Crew Point. What do you like as a skipper?
Sheer hell.
Hello? Speaking? Really? Yes, please. Thank you. Goodbye. That was Miss Stevens' solicitor. He's found out something very interesting about Mr. Fielding.
Oh?
I like this one.
Why?
The sails are such a lovely colour. And this £30,000 house with its 2 acres of ground was to be a wedding gift to your future wife?
Partly a gift, partly insurance.
Insurance?
Should I ever become bankrupt?
Yet you didn't put the house in her name.
I was going to do that at a later stage,
How much later?
after we were married.
What made you decide to wait until then?
Well, as a businessman, I would never dream of paying for merchandise until I'd received it.
Is that how you saw your future wife, as merchandise?
Oh, come, I was being flippant.
I suggest you were being flippant when you proposed marriage to her.
You may suggest what you like.
Did you mention the transfer of the freehold to anyone other than Miss Stevens and her great-aunt?
No.
You still maintain you bought the Larches as a wedding present for your future wife.
Well, she loved the dear old house.
You had no other reason for wanting it.
No.
But surely, Mr. Fielding, you showed an interest in it in November 1969. 6 months before the engagement, you offered Miss Stevens' great-aunt £25,000 for the property. Why?
I thought it would be ideal as a convalescent home for senior citizens who had become blind. It was to be a gift to the community.
Your philanthropy does you credit.
Thank you.
Is any of this in writing?
No, It was just an idea that never got off the ground.
We have to take your word for it, as we do for the transfer of the freehold.
I'm afraid so.
But the vendor refused to sell.
Yes.
And a few weeks later, you suddenly became attracted to the vendor's niece.
I found I enjoyed her company,
Coincidence?
if you like.
But you've known her since 1966, Mr. Fielding.
Only as a fellow councillor.
You'd seen her, sat near her,
Only in the council chamber.
talked to her, dined with her.
Only at civic functions.
But you weren't attracted to her.
I was a happily married man for 2 of those years.
Happily married?
Yes, happily married.
Even though your wife started divorce proceedings against you on the grounds of adultery?
That event occurred 4 years previously.
But you admit she had grounds.
Yes.
Bloody fool.
But she forgave me, and she withdrew the petition.
So it is possible to find other women attractive in spite of being a happily married man.
Yes.
But you didn't find Miss Stevens attractive.
I didn't want to hop into bed with her, if that's what you mean.
But you did just that 3 months after her great-aunt turned down your original offer to buy the Larches. For 4 years, you've taken precious little notice of her. But now, of course, she'd become a highly desirable piece of merchandise.
I object.
Yes, it is wrong to use the word merchandise in that context.
It was the plaintiff who categorized his fiancée as merchandise.
He did say he was being flippant, Miss Peterson.
You agree she had now become a highly desirable woman.
Yes.
Would you say that meant a complete volte-face on your part?
Yes.
Would you care to give us the reason?
Yes. Love. It does strange things to people.
Really?
Really. You should try it sometime.
There's no need to be impertinent, Mr. Fielding.
You should be saying that to her, not to me.
Don't tell me what I should say. Apologize to Miss Peterson.
I apologize.
Now, where were we? Ah, yes. You proposed marriage and entered into negotiations for the purchase of the Larches.
Yes.
You found Miss Stevens' great-aunt much more amenable this time.
Ah, but-
And the moment the contracts were exchanged, you broke off the engagement.
I did not break it off. Miss Stevens did.
The defendant has proof to the contrary.
Quite impossible.
You wrote a letter to her.
Does it say that I broke off the engagement?
Perhaps you'd care to read it to the court.
Oh, yes. I should. My darling, this is just to say how very sorry I am about last night. In spite of what happened, I'm still very fond of you. And I should like us to remain friends. Is this possible? Yours ever, Tom.
I suggest you wrote it in a fit of remorse.
It was written in a spirit of hope.
You said you were sorry for what happened.
Of course I was sorry. Nobody likes to be jilted.
Especially you.
Especially me.
You were angry?
Yes, I was.
Yet here you are, some few hours later, writing an apologetic letter.
I have a very forgiving nature.
If you have such a forgiving nature, Mr. Fielding, what are we all doing in court?
I didn't break off the engagement.
I suggest you did because Miss Stevens was of no further use to you.
I did not break it off.
I should now like to come to the evening of March the 27th, 1969. You were present when the sports complex was discussed?
Yes.
Was the Larches mentioned as a possible site for the complex?
No.
Did you and Councillor Martin discuss the subject between then and the subcommittee meeting in 1971?
No.
Not even while you were playing golf together?
No.
You don't find that extraordinary?
When I play golf with the sanitary inspector, we don't talk about drains.
Do you know who is to build the sports complex?
Fenton and Dalton.
And the subcontractors?
There are many.
I'm thinking of B's Electrical Installations Limited.
What about it?
You were a director of the company.
I resigned.
Not until you decided to bring a libel action against Miss Stevens.
And on my recommendation, the company asked to be released from its contract.
Why?
I knew that unscrupulous people would say that I had used my position as councillor to help the company get the contract.
Not only unscrupulous people. No further questions.
What was your involvement regarding B's Electric submitting a tender?
I knew nothing about it until the acceptance of the tender. That is the reason I resigned my directorship.
But you didn't immediately press the company to withdraw from the sports complex?
No, because I knew a number of men would lose their jobs. I waited until I personally had found these men other employment.
And would you say your being a councillor has made any financial difference to the company?
Yes. It cost them the contract.
Thank you, Mr. Fielding. You may step down. That is the plaintiff's case, my lord.
And I shall be calling members of the general public to prove that she is a most dedicated councillor.
Will that be necessary?
It's just that my client has been unable to find a single councillor from her own party who would give evidence regarding her devotion to the community.
And you think counsel for the plaintiff will make great play of this?
There is the possibility, my lord. But naturally, I shall be happy to be guided by you.
You must conduct your case, Miss Peterson.
If your lordship pleases. On the evening of March the 27th, 1969, Miss Stevens attended a committee meeting. At 10 p.m., the committee broke for coffee. Who said the Larches would make an excellent site for the sports complex?
I did.
Tell me, Mr. Forbes, when Colonel Watson asked you about this particular conversation, did he show you the letter Miss Stevens had written to him?
No, he merely wandered over, grunted something about the sports complex, asked me if I'd talked to anybody about it. No, I said. Well, I was speaking to someone else at the time, and I don't like being interrupted. And the Colonel didn't say it was important. He merely nodded his head and wandered off again. It was only when Miss Stevens telephoned me 2 days later I realized the seriousness of it all.
Thank you.
Now, you're a member of the opposition,
I am.
yet you had to be reminded of the conversation.
It happened a couple of years previously.
But you're a political animal, sir. I should have thought you'd remember something that would destroy the ruling party's credibility.
Perhaps I'm not a very good politician.
Or perhaps you never said the Larches will make an excellent site for the sports complex.
I did.
Would you kindly tell the court again exactly when your memory returned?
When Miss Stevens reminded me.
Are you saying she put the idea into your head?
I'm saying I remembered.
Very convenient.
I'm not here to make political capital, sir.
The fact that you're in the witness box surely proves otherwise.
No, I'm simply here to defend the lady's honour.
Most gallant of you, if it were true.
Which it is.
Councillor Martin has stated that the Larches was never once mentioned in the conversation. Are you saying is a lie?
I'm not that uncharitable.
Thank you. No further questions.
What was your reaction to his proposal?
I'm afraid I laughed.
Laughed?
I didn't take him seriously.
When did you take him seriously?
After I'd received the 6th bouquet of roses, I then came to the conclusion he meant it.
And you were happy?
I was astonished, but flattered.
Had you ever received a serious proposal before?
Once, 2 days later, he was killed in a plane crash.
Were you and that man lovers in the physical sense?
No, with no one until Mr. Fielding.
Has the possibility never arisen?
Yes, 3 or 4 times. I had always refused.
Why?
I was not in love with them.
But you were in love with Mr. Fielding.
When it happened, yes.
Was it an easy decision to make?
No, I should have preferred to wait, but he persuaded me. Besides, he had said he was going to marry me.
What happened to the relationship after Mr. Fielding became the owner of the Larches?
It changed. His whole attitude towards me changed. I hardly saw him. He kept avoiding me, kept making excuses. And then about a month or so later, he asked me out for a drink and told me the engagement was off.
Did he give a reason?
He'd decided it wouldn't work. Apparently he found me irritating. That my affection towards him left much to be desired.
What was your reaction to all this?
It was like a slap in the face. I was astonished, bewildered, hurt.
But according to Mr. Fielding, it was you who broke off the engagement.
But that is nonsense. He wrote a letter to me.
Is this the letter?
Yes.
Read it to the court, Miss Stevens.
This is just to say how very sorry I am about last night. In spite of what happened, I'm still very fond of you, and I should like us to remain friends. Is this possible? Yours ever, Tom.
Tell me, Miss Stevens, how long was it before you recovered from the ordeal?
About 6 months.
And what then were your feelings towards Mr. Fielding?
I only had one feeling, that of complete indifference. I was able to see him objectively again, and I thank my lucky stars he hadn't wanted to marry me.
You don't bear him any grudge?
Good heavens, no.
But you did say to Colonel Watson, "Good, now I can pay the bastard back."
But that's exactly how I said it, without malice.
You weren't stirring the witch's cauldron at the time?
No, not at all.
I should now like to come to the property known as the Larches. Was the possible acquisition of it as a sports complex ever mentioned in your hearing?
After Mr. Fielding became the owner?
Before?
Yes, once.
When?
March the 27th, 1969.
Do you remember who was present?
Yes, councillors Martin, Forbes and Fielding.
And what was said?
Mr. Martin brought up the subject of the sports complex, and Mr. Forbes said the Larches would make an excellent site for it.
When did Mr. Fielding first inform your great aunt he wanted to purchase her property?
In November 1969.
Did you wonder why?
Yes, but I dismissed it.
Your reason?
I could hardly believe that Mr. Fielding would use his privileged position as a councillor in order to make a fast buck. I have since been proved wrong.
Thank you, Miss Stevens.
Not yet, Miss Stevens. It's now my turn. Miss Stevens, why did you deliberately avoid starting Mr. Fielding's letter at the beginning?
It wasn't deliberate.
Can you recall the words you purposely ignored?
I didn't ignore them.
What were the two words?
My darling.
And does that sound to you like a man who had simply exploited you?
If the man's a hypocrite, yes.
Well, I suggest it's a most sincere letter. And for you to state otherwise shows a certain degree of heartlessness.
But I didn't state otherwise.
So you agree it was a sincere letter?
I'm prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt, yes.
And what would you say if I were to maintain that the letter does not prove that he jilted you, but that you jilted him?
I should find it most amusing.
Then please prepare yourself for a good laugh. I suggest it was you who broke off the engagement.
No.
Now, what is it we read? My darling, this is just to say how very sorry I am about last night. In spite of what happened, I'm still very fond of you. Now, would you not say such a letter was from a gentleman with a forgiving nature?
Forgiving? For breaking off the engagement?
For being told you no longer wish to marry him?
Oh, my God, if you believe that, you'll believe anything.
I see. Now, according to my arithmetic, you were 40 years of age before you had intimate relations with a man. You can't remember?
Of course I can remember.
Then will you please answer?
Yes.
I beg your pardon?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Perhaps you find these questions embarrassing.
Yes, I do.
You don't like to discuss such matters?
No, I don't.
Even in private?
Even in private, perhaps I'm old-fashioned.
Oh, you don't have to excuse your sensitivity.
I wasn't excusing it. I was explaining it.
Ah. Would it be fair to say that you find the physical side of love repulsive?
I don't like this line of questioning.
I'm sure you don't. I'm getting near the truth, aren't I?
What truth?
The fact that you would have preferred a platonic relationship with the plaintiff.
I should have preferred more time.
You made excuses?
Yes.
Did he understand?
No.
Was he kind?
No.
Patient?
No.
But you finally succumbed because you knew he loved you.
He couldn't have loved me.
Yet you went to bed with him.
Well, I thought he was in love with me.
Was it a pleasant experience?
No.
So you broke off the engagement?
No.
And pretended it was he who had broken it off?
But why?
To save yourself the embarrassment of talking about it in open court.
But this isn't true. You're twisting everything.
Then tell me this. Did you discuss your physical aversion with your solicitor?
How could I possibly discuss such things with a man?
With your counsel, then?
I never thought you'd sink to this.
Madam, I'm prepared to crawl underground to find out the truth.
But this isn't the truth.
But you've admitted you wanted a platonic relationship.
I did not admit it.
But you would have preferred it, yes?
Yes.
But Mr. Fielding was not interested in such a relationship?
No.
So who won?
He did.
And this is when you started to hate him.
I hated myself.
But you no longer loved him.
I did.
While he was being intimate with you?
No.
And what were your feelings then?
I felt I was being used.
And you hated him for it?
For a few moments, perhaps.
Not perhaps. Yes!
Yes, then!
And not for a few minutes, but from then on. In bed or out of it. Because you were revolted by the depth of his feelings for you.
It's not as simple as that.
It was this you had in mind when you said to Colonel Watson, "Good, now I can pay the bastard back."
Yes.
You wanted vengeance.
No!
You've admitted you hated Mr. Fielding, and your letter to Colonel Watson proved it. You didn't care what lies you told, provided he suffered for having had the effrontery to fall in love with you.
That's a filthy thing to say.
Madam, the truth can be filthy. No further questions, my lord.
I should like you to answer this, Miss Stevens. Was his love-making natural or unnatural?
It was perfectly natural.
You're not saying that to avoid further embarrassment.
There was nothing perverted about it.
And in spite of your revulsion, you didn't break off the engagement?
No, I did not.
Thank you, Miss Stevens. You may step down. And furthermore, there was the remarkable attack which my learned friend chose to launch upon the defendant. Your lordship may well consider it had little to do with the issues in this case, save to cast light upon the plaintiff's character. One knows well enough my learned friend would never embark upon such a delicate line of inquiry without full instructions from his client. And what is one to think of a man who would descend to these particulars? I invite your lordship to hold that the purpose of this personal attack was to divert attention from the real issue in this case, namely, whether on the evening of March the 27th, 1969, the Larches was mentioned as a possible site for the sports complex in Mr. Fielding's hearing, and whether he used that knowledge to further his own ends. Your lordship will remember that Messrs. Martin and Fielding are good friends, and you may consider it improbable that friends would fail to talk business on the golf course. It would be like barristers remaining mute about the outcome of a case in which they were involved. If such a miracle took place, it would most certainly make the Guinness Book of Records.
I repeat, it is all circumstantial. For example, there is not one iota of proof to show that Mr. Fielding deliberately seduced Miss Stevens in order to gain possession of the Larches. Why should he? The defendant didn't own the property, it wasn't in her name. She wasn't even a beneficiary under the will. If Mr. Fielding had been such a man, he wouldn't have wasted his time on Miss Stevens. He would have seduced her great aunt. No, the plaintiff was genuinely in love with Miss Stevens, and it is regrettable that she could not respond. A tragedy undoubtedly exists here, but such a tragedy has no relevance in this particular case.
Then why did you keep on at me about it?
You must remain silent.
It wasn't necessary. He's just said it wasn't
Unless
necessary.
you
and yet he
remain
went
silent,
on
Miss
and on.
Stevens, you will go to prison for contempt of court.
Now, the defense tried to prove that the house was to be a gift, but it was to be a gift only in so much as to give him a roof over his head, should he ever become bankrupt. Perfectly legal arrangement. Now, you may say, why did B's Electrical Installations Limited submit a tender for approval? My immediate retort is, why not? It wasn't sent anonymously. Mr. Fielding's name was on all the company letter headings. Now, no one has come forward to say it was a conspiracy. No one has complained of favoritism. The defense counsel tried desperately to use the ploy of guilt through resignation. What else was the poor man to do? If he hadn't resigned, it would have been wrong. You cannot win with some people.
And I was particularly impressed with Miss Stevens' honesty when she was asked whether Mr. Fielding's sexual behavior was unnatural. There was no question of her striving to win sympathy. I am satisfied Mr. Fielding ended the affair, not because he had got what he wanted, but rather because he could not get what he wanted. And as I am not here to judge his morals, I shall leave it at that, except to say that my sympathy is with Miss Stevens. Was Mr. Fielding a cruel and ruthless man in matters of business? Not one witness came forward to testify that he was. I am quite satisfied that Miss Stevens did not have his business affairs in mind when she wrote that he was a cruel and ruthless man. Was there a conspiracy of silence? I saw and heard Colonel Watson give evidence. I am satisfied he is a man of principles, a man of mature judgment, a man who has fought the good fight on the verbal battleground of local government. He was horrified by the content of the letter, and he immediately instituted his own inquiries. There could not be a conspiracy of silence with such a man in charge. Furthermore, he did not strike me as someone who would wander into a conversation, grunt, and wander out again, as Councillor Forbes stated. I watched the two councillors and listened to them most carefully. I preferred the recollections of Mr. Martin to those of Mr. Forbes. I am quite satisfied that during the conversation of the 27th of March, 1969, the Larches was never mentioned as a possible site for the sports complex. Mr. Fielding has therefore cleared his name. However, in arriving at the amount of damages I must award, I have not been uninfluenced by the allegations he chose to make through the mouth of his counsel. Furthermore, he has not suffered financially. I award him the sum of £500 damages.
I ask for judgment for £500.
I see there is some money in court. How much?
£505, my lord.
That makes a clear difference on costs, does it not, Sir John?
Yes, it does, my lord.
Very well. Judgment for the plaintiff for £500 with costs up to the date of payment in. Defendant's costs against the plaintiff thereafter.
What does it mean? Who has won?
It's cost you 500 odd pounds, but you haven't lost.
I'm sorry, I just don't understand.
You paid £505 into court. If Fielding had accepted that amount, you'd have had to pay all the costs up to that time, and that would have been the end of it. But because he refused to settle, he now has to pay the costs from the moment the money was paid into court, plus his own, of course. And that'll come to something much more than £500.
But why?
Because that's the way the law works. It's intended to encourage people to settle cases. Isn't that so, Sir John?
At one point, I was relieved the proverbial farthing was no longer in circulation.
He certainly didn't like your client.
I was rather hoping yours would lose the old boy's sympathy with that ghastly feminine outburst of hers. So embarrassing.
I'm surprised he allowed Fielding the satisfaction of even a Pyrrhic victory. I wonder why he did.
Probably because of the tie.
Tie? What tie? Whose tie?
Colonel Watson's. He and the judge went to the same school.
Really, Sir John, you're surely not suggesting there was a conspiracy of silence between them? Why, we're talking about men of principles, men of mature judgment, men who have fought the good fight.